Welcome back to another episode of Executive Conversations, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Before I do that, actually, please do remember to give this a like and share and subscribe to the channel. I always forget to say that. And let's just jump right into it. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know what it's about. It's about navigating executive conversations. And today I have Hannah Garner, who is the VP of Marketing at Arctic Shores, which is an HR software. Hannah, how are you?
I'm good, Maeva. I'm really glad to be chatting to you today.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk to you today. We met in June. Was it June? No, we met in person in June, but we met in like January. I don't remember when the cohort was. Sometime in the winter.
Yeah.
Through Pavilion, and then we were placed in the same cohort. And there was also Lisa, who was on a prior episode, Lisa Vecchio. And we ended up meeting in person at SaaStr in London. And we've kept in touch. And I'm really excited that you're here today because you had a lot of ideas about this topic.
Likewise, yeah. Also really excited to chat. And as you said, kind of always so lovely to meet in person and get to swap ideas. I'm a bit of a kind of magpie for different ideas and different theories. So I've been loving the podcast so far and yeah, really excited to chat.
Yeah, thanks. No, you were just telling me right now your story about you've worked with all kind of sizes of companies, but somewhere between 1 million to 50 million and scaling up, either reporting directly to the founder or the CEO or the second CEO after the founder. So can you just walk me through those experiences and how that might change this topic, like how you are getting buy-in for what you need to do?
Yeah, so I think for most of my career, I've kind of worked for startup, scale up, so only ever really in that space. So I think the approaches that you have to getting buy-in in a kind of 50 million revenue, really mature organization are probably not things I have that much experience or can share anything useful about. And even in the other stages, I definitely wouldn't say I'm perfect. But I guess I started out my career working for a quite niche organisation that was going through massive growth phase. So was, at its peak, kind of 50 million revenue organisation. And so that was super interesting because actually at the time the business was still quite small. So got exposed to loads of different types of things, was just doing a marketing manager job, but was still going through a period of reporting to the CEO, which was a massive learning curve. And actually, I think when you reflect on how you get buy-in and you do it really well, I think there's a lot of lessons I've probably taken from the mistakes that I made doing that, being thrown in at the deep end. But I guess more recently, the kind of, marketing leadership experiences that I've had have been for organizations who are trying to go on that journey from, 1 to 3 million, let's get to 10 million ARR. And as I've been in kind of lots of startup scale-up organizations, they've not been massive and the complexity hasn't been huge. So actually the conversations you're having around getting buy-in for your strategy or your budget are probably a lot simpler than they might be in bigger organizations. But actually there is some kind of also quite specific nuance, I think, when you're working for a founder CEO or when you're working for maybe the second CEO who comes in after the founder, who's also probably actually, in my experience, people who've been with the business for a really long time. So they almost kind of, have a similar vibe to being a founder CEO, really.
So, sorry, I'm just taking notes. What is you mentioned before the call as well that in those earlier stages, it's really important to get buy-in on the strategy before the budget.
Yeah, I think so. I think in a lot of the scenarios that I think I've found myself in the past, and I think actually maybe this is quite true if you're generally you're new in role, you're going in to either kind of maybe fix a marketing motion that's not quite working, or maybe the company's got to the point of scale where they need something a little bit different from marketing to kind of get them to the next level of their revenue ambition. And, I guess all the best practice about how do you get buy for your strategy or how do you get buy for your budget is use the data. But in a lot of those scenarios, you don't really have the data. So maybe you don't even have a clean data set. maybe you've just not really done that much marketing, and actually maybe the business is kind of growing quite quickly and there might be like a little bit of a lack of alignment on what good looks like for the marketing org, or even maybe the wider go-to-market motion. And so actually I think if you start your conversations with, I want to spend money on this stuff and I want to I think these are all the right activities that we should be doing right now, you're probably going to fall a bit flat at the first hurdle, because what you're probably going to find is that no one really knows what good looks like in the first place, or maybe people do know what good looks like, but maybe not based on the set of context that you've got in the business at the time. And so actually a lot of the time I find it's more useful to go back to basics and think about what's the strategy, how do we get buy-in for the strategy, how does that align, if the wider company goal is X, what does the go-to-market strategy need to be for that? And then actually almost the budget is the last thing you want to talk about, because I think particularly in businesses where you've got, where they're smaller, we all know that lots of people have strong opinions about marketing and what good looks like. But what you don't want to do is get into a conversation with someone who's never had to manage an SEO agency before about whether it's a good idea to spend 5k a month or 7k a month, because actually the call, they're not going to give you the right context. Actually, a better conversation to have is, okay, well, if we know based on the market conditions that we're in right now that our core buyer persona is seeking educational content, then actually maybe we should be thinking about ways we give it to them, and then we need to think about how we get it to them. And so actually that conversation, I think, then is much cleaner. And then by the time you get to a budget conversation, like you kind of, it's more of a checkbox, like, do the metrics work? And obviously that changes depending on who you're talking to as well.
But you have to have some kind of idea about what the budget is for the strategy, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I think I'm definitely not saying create a strategy without having a budget. I think there's I guess there's different kind of ways of working at it, right? And I think I've worked in organizations where there's obviously going to be a fixed amount of money, and actually you might go off some kind of industry benchmark depending on whether your CFO or your VP of finance wants you to work to, okay, I think roughly if we're going to hit this new bookings number, I think we need to spend 50% of your new bookings number is your marketing budget. So I think you're not working from a place of like finger in the air, here's what I think the strategy should be. I guess you're kind of taking all the context into account, and the context is probably you start with, okay, well, what's the revenue number that we think we need to hit? And then actually you're probably gonna, I guess the challenge that you have, particularly if you're in a marketing org where you don't have a lot of data, is you're going to have to go a bit finger in the air on what you think you can deliver, and you're kind of drawing on your past experience or maybe some industry benchmarks, but you can't say, okay, well, if I spend this amount on marketing, I can guarantee we're going to get this much in pipeline, because you've not done it before. So you're having to take a bit of a bet. But yeah, 100% you're going to start with the strategy, but also you're going to have a number. I guess more what you don't want to get into is the mechanics of, how do I split the budget? And maybe actually at a high level, you would have a conversation which is like, oh, I want to spend 30% of my budget on events, or like 20% on brand, or you might have that conversation, but you don't want to be splitting hairs on what exactly do I spend the money on.
How does what does a strategy sound like to you, or what is a strategy to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think actually when I was thinking about the chat we were going to have, I was thinking, how do you, like, what does good look like, right, when it comes to pitching your strategy, potentially if you're new in role? And I think a lot of the time the thing that you have to remember is that you are a marketeer and this is partly a thought, a thinking exercise for you to make sure you're being really strategic and really thoughtful with making good decisions for the business. But also you probably have to remember that you're kind of, it's also a sales process. And so actually, I guess to give you a more tangible example, when I was new in my last role and I was thinking about marketing strategy and I didn't really have that much data to go on, but I kind of knew I had data on, okay, well, here's the revenue goal. I know the business wants to get to profitability. actually, when I think about the kind of, stuff that would go in your investor deck, so the size of the total addressable market and how much of that I think I need to penetrate to hit these numbers, kind of you start there, right? So you start with like, what is the business trying to achieve? And then I think the second part of that is to think about the other market forces behind it. So actually, if you were to think about how you might relate that to a sales deck, I'm sure lots of people listening to this are probably familiar with Andy Raskin and the strategic narrative. So your strategic narrative is, what's the big shift in the world? Well, the big shift in the world is we want to get to this revenue goal, and these are the conditions for the business. But then the second part of the big shift in the world is like, okay, well, let's think about the market forces and the dynamics. And so actually, I think particularly if you go into business that doesn't have a super mature marketing operation or maybe a super mature go-to-market team generally, you might actually need to have some conversations about like, what do B2B buyer journeys look like? You might pull out like that Gartner slide. You might talk about dark social. You might talk about like, we can't rely on one channel anymore because actually there's 200 touch points that drive a sales process. So actually, I think you're thinking a bit more about helping people understand the holistic reasons behind why you're suggesting the strategy that you're suggesting, if that makes sense. And then you might go into the stuff that's a bit more tangible, which is actually, there's a really great resource that I've used a few times from Emily Kramer from MKT1. She talks about kind of marketing advantages. So what are the marketing advantages that are at play at the moment that should inform your strategy? So it might be stuff like, there's a new trend or regulation that's forcing people to reevaluate their tech stack, for example, if you're in B2B SaaS, or your audience has got this new problem that's kind of come about because of that, so they're seeking educational content on a specific area. And actually, I think when you play at the strategic narrative level, people can kind of get behind that. And then actually, when you start talking about the tactics that are going to help you create that educational content or take advantage of the fact that there's a trend that people are going to need to know more about, then the rest of the conversation feels a bit easier.
Yeah, so when you're presenting a strategy, because I know you can have a business strategy that is like, we're going to go after this size company,
100%,
this angle, etc. How close is that to the marketing strategy, or how do you see, can it be also, because I always found that those sound a little bit vague, but I understand why we do that. I guess you do need that kind of over high level.
Yeah, well, I think they have to fit together. And I think actually, I think they're really integral parts of how you build the marketing strategy. I guess there's probably actually when you think about the different layers you're going to present to different people to get buy-in, you're probably going to come at it from a different angle, just as you would if you were, I don't know, presenting to like an individual champion or a like wider buying committee. So I think I would probably start with the super strategic visionary level of, here's the objectives we need to get done for, I don't know, if you're presenting to your wider leadership and management team as part of your kind of OKR setting process or your overall budget setting process. But actually, I think when you get into the weeds of like, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to actually create that go-to-market strategy, you definitely got to drill down further. So I think you would expect to then say, okay, well, to get to this revenue goal, we need to win this much market share, which means actually, we can't just say we want to be the market leader for X. We're probably going to have to get there in phases, especially if we're trying to do it while we're going to get to profitability. So you might say, okay, we're going to be able to do this, we're going to go after this specific segment of the market with these specific personas and this ICP first. And so actually the rest of our strategy is going to line up around that. So actually we're going to do this really niche trade show, we're going to create some really industry specific content, and we're going to work with the outbound team to go after that very specific market segment. Again, like all that kind of should hopefully make sense if you've set your high level table out. But I think you're right. I think absolutely you've got to have the detail on, this is who our ICP is, this is fundamentally what our marketing approach is, like this is what our flywheel looks like, our key pillars, all that kind of stuff.
When it comes to total addressable market, is that something that you come up with as a marketer, or does the company already have that data?
I think it depends. I think ideally the company's already got that data. I think ideally that's the kind of thing, even when they're going for a funding round, they've been thinking about that. I think your job as a marketer is then to figure out, okay, well, with the money I've got, here's how much of that total addressable market I can actually reach within the next year, for example. And actually, if you want me to go bigger and you want to hit a bigger revenue goal, then we're going to need to reach more people, and that's going to mean more money. But it's all a conversation about trade-offs, I guess, at that point.
How do you come up with those numbers? Like, with this money, I think I can reach this many.
I think that's the thing that's really hard if you're new in seat, right? Because if you're new in role, you don't have any data to go off. You're going to have to mostly, I think, go on your gut. So you might say, actually, I'm going to pause. That's a really hard question. How do you come up with those numbers? I don't actually know if I've got a good answer for that,
Well, you must have done it before, right?
Pardon?
You must have done it before.
Yeah, I have done it before. I don't think I've ever done it in a particularly mathematical way. I think that's the
That's
thing.
okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay, let me try and say that. I think the challenge with coming up with those numbers, if you don't have that much data, is that you kind of have to go a little bit off your gut, a little bit off instinct, a little bit off kind of industry benchmarks and kind of what feels sensible. I don't think there is ever a magic bullet to that. And I think, especially if you're really early stage in a company, actually part of the way you build buy-in for your strategy, I think, comes from the conversation that you have with the CEO before you even take the role, right? Which is, what are your ambitions? Does that feel reasonable? And, I think I'm hearing a lot of peers at the moment, and, people who we met through CMO school who are, looking for different roles, where the conversations that they're having with companies are like, okay, I want you to get me to 25 million ARR in a year, but I've only got 3 million in funding. And you have to use your gut and say, well, that's probably impossible, because actually a lot of this is maths. And in an ideal world, if you've been going for a couple of years, you've got good enough data, so you know what your total cost of acquisition is. But I think the challenge comes when you're having to make big, wild bets. But actually, you've got to get buy-in for that approach and be honest as well. I think building your strategy isn't, there's no magic bullets. You can't necessarily predict what's going to happen. Obviously, predictable revenue is the dream, but particularly when you're operating in the earlier stages and smaller revenue numbers, most companies don't have predictable revenue. So you've got to kind of make a sensible bet, I think.
I think that most companies understand that they're bets, that a lot of, it's just informed guesses. You have experienced marketers who are saying, I don't have the data, but here's what I would do and why I would do it. But somehow there's a level of trust established at that point.
100%. And I think that's it's kind of on you to build that trust as well and make sensible decisions and use the data you've got at your disposal. So, actually, based on industry best practice and based on the theory around this strategy and based on what I've done before, my gut tells me this feels about right, but obviously you're going to have to run with me. I think sometimes what is quite interesting with that is actually the conversations you have around that kind of thing. The dynamics might change based on who you're speaking to. So actually, if you're speaking to the CEO and they're really bought into the kind of type of marketing strategy that you've decided to develop, so actually we're going to go really big on content marketing, for example, which actually, your bet might be that narrow, particularly if you're a small company and you're trying to run profitably and you don't have a huge funding round, then actually, they're bought into the vision. You probably had that conversation before you joined. If you're trying to have a conversation with the CFO, for example, maybe even the CFO has changed. And so you had a great conversation with the CEO, you're really aligned, but a new person has come into the mix. You go through that norming, storming, performing kind of phase every time you add a new person to the mix. So you have to kind of rebuild that trust on, actually, no, I'm making a sensible bet. And actually, the way that you kind of build buy-in for the strategy might need to change. So I've definitely had that in the past where I've worked with a CEO for quite a long time and we've been really aligned on marketing strategy, but a new CFO's joined and actually they look at marketing and evaluate success a slightly different way. And actually I think you need to lean into that. And so in that case, you might start looking at, okay, well, the marketing needs to be 50, non-marketing spend should be 50% of new bookings. Like, are we at that? Are we not at that? What does the historical data we've got show about how much we need to spend on marketing actually to get to this new bookings number? And then actually, does that feel right when I look at the company's magic number or when I look at the CAC to LTV? Because if it doesn't feel right, then actually we probably need to bring that down.
Yeah.
But those are sensible conversations you should be having anyway, right? But I guess the other side of that is when you're building your strategy, you've got to, again, kind of make sensible decisions about what are you going to change, because you don't have the data to say, okay, well, if I want to halve my customer acquisition cost but I want to keep my revenue the same, which are the kind of conversations you might have in a kind of much smaller startup, then you're going to have to again take big wild swings, and it's about how much trust that you've built and how much your strategy sounds sensible and how much you've helped people understand the bigger context versus the actual mechanics of what you're spending.
What was that experience like for you when the new CFO joined? I mean, was it your instinct? You said, okay, new CFO, I better do a deep dive on what's important to them. Although we know that CFO is how much money are we spending, I guess.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
was your thoughts on
I think it was that, actually. I think and I think I had an eye on that stuff anyway. I'm definitely not saying that I'm sitting there never looking at those kinds of metrics, but I think, yeah, like, it's really important. It's one of your most important relationships as a marketing leader is with the CFO, and you've got to work really hard at it. And so, yeah, I think I did kind of go into that thinking, okay, what do they care about? And actually had some really, good chats with them about marketing. And actually, it wasn't long before we had the conversation, which was, do you know what? I don't really care what you spend your budget on. I just care about these kind of higher level metrics, and does it stack up? And that, is totally fair enough. And I guess the other thing is, you're all in the leadership team because you're designed to work together to make really good decisions and bring different points of view. And I think, yeah, if you go into those conversations assuming that the CFO is going to be your enemy, then you're probably never going to win.
Did you have to learn any kind of financial skills to be able to have these conversations, or how did you up level there?
Yeah, I think there's two types of marketer, right? And I think we had some conversations about this in CMO school. There's some who go into marketing because they're great at maths, and there's some who go into marketing because they're really creative and great at copywriting. And I would put myself in the second camp. I definitely not. I definitely don't come with tons of built-in financial acumen or mathematical knowledge. But I think I've also been really fortunate that from the businesses that I've worked in, and actually even when I was doing my first marketing job as a marketing manager, the business had a hyper focus on all the kind of SaaS metrics that you would look at. And so actually I built that literacy quite early. I think, there's various schools of thought on this, right? Where I think some people say, oh, the CMO should be able to stand in for the CFO in a board call. I think you've got to know your numbers. You've got to have some level of financial literacy there. I think actually if you're going into a board meeting and you're pitching a strategy and someone asks you a numbers question and you don't have the answer, you're going to lose that trust really quickly. So I think I probably would be honest and say it's not something that comes naturally to me, but it's something I work quite hard at, and have also been really fortunate to work with some awesome CFOs who've done the mechanics, some great RevOps people who've been able to pull the numbers. I think I definitely know what I need the numbers to say. I'm really good at analysing them. The actual mechanics of how I get to the numbers is less obvious to me. But I would say that ChatGPT has been a game changer for that.
Really? I bet.
Yeah.
What, if you were to go to a board meeting right now and you said, I better know these numbers if they ask me, which numbers would they be?
Oh, you're testing me now. I think I would. So I definitely expect to have a view on the basic stuff, like what's the company's magic number, what's the cost of acquiring a customer, what's the CAC to LTV ratio, like that kind of stuff. I would expect to know that. I think, again, I wouldn't necessarily expect to be asked about it unless it looked really unhealthy. But also, if I looked at it and thought it looked really unhealthy, I would I would go in with a plan. I think one of the things that we talked about in CMO school as well was like actually a lot of the work preparing for a board meeting is in the appendix, that you're going to show maybe 5 slides at most, but you need to be on it with your numbers. I think that's definitely something that I have lived by. I think more than anything, though, the numbers I would expect to kind of show would be the numbers that show, you know, what's actually working. So what is the impact of marketing on pipeline and then on revenue? And actually, when we look at our deals, where are they coming from, and that kind of thing. Again, like sometimes the board won't want that level of detail, but they kind of want to know that you've been thinking about it, I think. So depending on the type of meeting would depend on whether I would actually pitch that stuff, but I definitely expect to know the answers to it.
You just have it prepared in the back.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want to know the efficiency of marketing spend. That's kind of just good mechanics of running a marketing team as well, right?
Well, this feels like a pretty good place to wrap it up, Hannah. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really nice chatting with you.
Likewise, loved it. Thanks, Maeva.
I will link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And also, if you could send me the link to the Emily Kramer resource that you mentioned, and I will drop it in there as well, because that sounded pretty useful. All right. And for those listening, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe, share, send me a message. Let me know that if you listened to it, and we will see you in the next one.